When Frank Fritz was abruptly let go from American Pickers in March 2020, fans were left completely blindsided. For over a decade, Frank had been a cornerstone of the show, a familiar, passionate face who brought history to life through forgotten treasures. His sudden departure stirred up plenty of questions, theories, and even controversy. But as shocking as that moment was, it would soon be eclipsed by something even more heartbreaking. In September 2024, the world received devastating news. Frank Fritz had passed away. The announcement hit the collector community like a thunderbolt. Social media was flooded with tributes, memories, and expressions of grief. But even in death, Frank's story held more layers than anyone expected. Rumors began to circulate, rumors about his final words, that sent chills down the spines of fans and friends alike. And just when the world thought it had come to terms with his passing, his estate revealed something so unexpected, so staggering, that it left even his closest companions at a complete loss for words. But before diving into the revelations that followed his death, it's worth taking a moment to remember the man behind the fame, the passionate collector, whose love for forgotten items changed the way millions of viewers saw the past. Frank Fritz was born on October 11, 1963 in Davenport, Iowa. From an early age, he showed a deep curiosity for the world around him. While most kids were consumed with cartoons, baseball, or video games, Frank was captivated by old coins, vintage beer cans, weathered stamps, and even rusted-out razor blades. If an item had a story, Frank wanted to know it. To him, every object held a trace of someone's life, a whisper of the past that deserved to be heard. As he grew older, that curiosity only intensified. He graduated from tiny handheld collectibles to much larger relics, motorcycles, dirt bikes, and rare pieces of memorabilia that carried with them the echoes of history. Flea markets, garage sales, and estate auctions became his hunting grounds. And if there was an old barn off a forgotten highway packed to the ceiling with dust-covered treasures, you could bet Frank was already knocking on the door, ready to dig through it all. Despite this deep passion, Frank didn't jump straight into a career of picking and collecting. I've had other plans first. For nearly 25 years he worked as a fire inspector in Iowa. It was a serious job, one that required precision, an eye for detail, and a deep sense of responsibility. Yet even while navigating safety protocols and examining buildings, his collector's spirit remained alive and well. In fact, that job gave him something special. Access to buildings most people would never see. Abandoned warehouses, old firehouses, forgotten corners of history. It wasn't long before Frank started collecting firehouse memorabilia, smoke-blackened helmets, vintage fire alarms, extinguishers with dents and stories. What started as a hobby soon turned into a full-blown side hustle. Seeing potential, started buying and selling, realizing there was more than just sentimental value in these pieces. There was real market value too. This was the moment Frank's two worlds started to collide. The steady government job offered stability, but his heart was elsewhere. Eventually, he made the bold decision to walk away from his career as a fire inspector and pursue his passion full-time. He opened Frank's Finds, a modest antique shop that specialized in rare collectibles and fireman gear. What began as a small business would become the launching pad for something much bigger. When the producers of American Pickers came calling, they weren't just looking for another picker. They were looking for someone with genuine passion, grit, and a deep love for history. Frank was all of that and more. For over a decade, viewers followed Frank as he crisscrossed the country, hunting for treasure in the most unexpected places. His eye for detail, unfiltered honesty, and occasional arguments with co-host Mike Wolf became hallmarks of the show. But beneath the reality TV persona was still that same boy from Iowa, curious, committed, and always searching for the next forgotten gem. His legacy lives on, not just through the show, but in every dusty barn, cluttered attic, and roadside shop, where history still waits to be uncovered. And as for the stunning revelations after his passing, those secrets lie just ahead, and they may just change everything we thought we knew about Frank Fritz. Fame wasn't something Frank Fritz ever truly chased. Before American Pickers turned him into a household name, he was just a small-town guy with an unmatched eye for hidden treasures and a deep love for the thrill of the hunt. But as fate would have it, that passion would one day lead him to national stardom and to the homes of millions of viewers across the country. Frank's journey into television wasn't a solo ride. Another Iowa native, Mike Wolf, shared the same obsession for antiques, rusty relics, and forgotten stories. While the two didn't start out as best friends, their mutual passion for picking created a bond that grew over time. Mike had a big vision. He saw antique hunting as more than just a hobby. To him, it was a lifestyle, a potential media empire waiting to be born. Frank, on the other hand, was more grounded. He was happy running his small shop, Frank's Finds, and had no grand ambitions for TV fame, simply loved what he did. But Mike wasn't one to let a great idea die. Began documenting his treasure hunts, filming himself digging through barns and negotiating deals, hoping someone in the industry would see the potential. He pitched the concept to anyone who would listen. After some convincing, Frank agreed to come on board. The show was born, and so was one of cable television's most unlikely success stories. When American Pickers premiered on the History Channel in January 2010, it struck gold immediately. Over 3.1 million viewers tuned in for the debut episode, making it one of the highest-rated premieres in the network's history. But the real magic of the show wasn't just in the vintage motorcycles or quirky signs. It was in the chemistry between Mike and Frank. Their dynamic was natural, unforced, and filled with genuine enthusiasm for what they did. Their friendship wasn't manufactured for the cameras. It had been built over years of picking side by side, earning the trust of collectors across the country. Mike brought the sharp business mind, always hunting for the next high-lore item that could flip for a profit. Frank was the heart. He had a calming presence and a natural ability to connect with sellers on a personal level. He didn't just see dollar signs, he saw stories. Whether it was a beat-up toy truck or a forgotten jukebox, Frank always wanted to know the why behind it. That authenticity is what made him a fan favorite. Viewers didn't just watch. Frank and Mike picked through old garages. They joined them on the journey. Danielle Colby managing the shop, antique archaeology. The trio became a well-oiled machine, which brought something unique to the table. And together they created a formula that worked brilliantly for over a decade. Week after week, Frank and Mike hit the road, navigating rural backroads, sifting through generations of dust and decay and uncovering the gems hidden in plain sight. Their adventures weren't just about objects, they were about people, connections, and preserving pieces of history. And for many fans, Frank's enthusiasm and warmth were what made the show feel special. But like all journeys, this one eventually took an unexpected turn. Frank's final episode aired in March 2020. At the time, the world was in disarray. The pandemic had halted productions across the board, and fans assumed Frank's absence was temporary. But weeks turned into months, and still, there was no sign of his return. Rumors began to swirl, but few suspected the gravity of what was really happening behind the scenes, unbeknownst to the public. Frank was facing a series of personal battles that would ultimately pull him away from the spotlight. Always a private man, he rarely spoke about his struggles publicly. Even as the show's producers and Mike Wolf moved forward with new episodes, featuring new faces and new locations, Frank remained silent, out of the spotlight and out of touch. With the life he had built over the past decade, fans were confused. The silence was deafening. For someone who had spent years connecting with millions through a love of storytelling and forgotten artifacts, Frank's sudden absence felt like a story left unfinished. As time would reveal, the chapter was far more complex than anyone imagined. What happened next would shock even the most devoted American Pickers viewers. Over time, even the most loyal fans couldn't ignore that something was off with Frank Fritz. For years, viewers had noticed his weight fluctuating. Some chalked it up to aging, while others quietly worried that something deeper might be going on. Then Frank opened up and confirmed what many suspected: he was battling a chronic illness. He had Crohn's disease, a painful and unpredictable condition that attacks the digestive tract. often leaving its sufferers exhausted in constant pain, unsure of what the next day might bring. At first, Frank tackled the disease head-on. He committed to a strict diet and lost an impressive 65 pounds. It seemed like he had things under control, but anyone familiar with Crohn's knows it's not something you ever truly beat, something you manage, endure, and fight through day after day. Frank, ever the determined spirit, refused to let it stop him from doing what he loved. He kept picking, kept digging through dusty barns, and kept entertaining millions. But beneath the surface, he was waging a war with his own body. That war was slowly taking its toll. Yet health issues weren't the only burden Frank was carrying. Fame that had once seemed like a blessing began to weigh heavily on him. When American Pickers skyrocketed in popularity, Frank found himself in a new and uncomfortable spotlight. No longer just a guy hunting for antiques, he became a reality TV star. With that came the pressure to always be on, to be the witty, warm-hearted Picker fans saw on screen, even on days when he wasn't feeling well, even when life was unraveling behind the scenes. Frank later admitted that the constant attention made him anxious. He wasn't built for celebrity. He was a man who loved simplicity, history, and a good find, not red carpets or constant public scrutiny. Over time, the fame that had elevated his career also began to erode his peace of mind. Then came 2020, the year everything truly fell apart. Frank's health took a dramatic turn. He required major back surgery, the kind of procedure that would put anyone out of commission for months. It wasn't minor, it involved 185 stitches, the insertion of 2 rods in his spine, and a grueling recovery process. But physical pain wasn't his only struggle. Frank was also battling demons behind closed doors, including a long-standing fight with addiction. His absence from American Pickers was initially explained as a temporary break time to heal, rest, and eventually return. But weeks turned into months, and the show rolled on without him. By 2021, fans began to grow suspicious. That July, Mike Wolfe made the announcement official. Frank wasn't coming back. His exit was no longer just a hiatus, it was permanent. Mike released a public statement expressing love and support for his former co-host, saying he wished Frank the best and would always miss him. But in a rare and raw interview shortly after, Frank dropped a bombshell that stunned fans. He claimed that during his entire health crisis and recovery, Mike never once picked up the phone. Not a single call, not even a text. For viewers who had watched the two men travel the country together for years, it was a shocking revelation. Frank went further, suggesting that the friendship people saw on screen wasn't the full story. Behind the scenes, he believed Mike had been looking for an excuse to push him out of the show, and his health crisis had provided the perfect opportunity. Fans were torn. Some turned their frustration toward Mike, accusing him of betrayal. Others pointed to Frank's personal issues and speculated that they may have made working together difficult. The internet buzzed with debates, as longtime viewers tried to reconcile the charming duo they had come to love with the bitter reality unfolding in the headlines. In response, Mike maintained that he and the team cared deeply for Frank, but he also implied that helping him had become increasingly challenging. The truth, as always, was far more complicated than any single version of the story. According to a mutual friend, the situation wasn't as black and white as fans made it seem. Years of working together, long days, constant travel, and the intense demands of filming a hit show had worn both men down. Add in Frank's medical issues and personal battles, it became clear that the foundation of their friendship had started to crack long before his departure. In the end, it wasn't one dramatic blow-up that ended things. It was a slow drifting, a result of fame, stress, and the natural strain that builds over a decade of working side by side. For fans, it was a hard truth to accept. American Pickers had made it feel like Frank and Mike were a lifelong team. But real life, as it so often does, told a much more painful and complex story. Even after stepping away from television, Frank remained in the hearts of millions, and the full truth of his journey was only just beginning to come to light. Even after stepping away from the spotlight, Frank Fritz never really left the world of antiques behind. In fact, he leaned into it. More than ever, he knew the landscape was changing. Fewer people were wandering through dusty roadside shops. and more collectors were turning to online marketplaces to chase down their next find. But Frank wasn't one to be left behind by a trend. He adapted with the times, launching his own digital storefront and using social media to connect with collectors and fans around the world. For Frank, it was never about clinging to fame or staying relevant. It was about keeping the soul of picking alive in a modern era, whether it was through posting photos of rare finds, sharing stories behind old items, or offering advice to new collectors. Frank made sure that the joy and excitement of treasure hunting could still reach people even if it was through a screen instead of a shop. But antiques weren't his only love. If there was one passion that rivaled his obsession with forgotten treasures, it was motorcycles. Frank's relationship with bikes went all the way back to his youth. One of his earliest big purchases was a 1964 Harley-Davidson. Bold move for a young man. It's probably a source of anxiety for his parents. But to Frank, it wasn't just a machine. It was a piece of history, a work of art on two wheels. That first bike ignited a lifelong passion. Over the decades, he built an impressive collection, eventually filling an entire barn with rare and classic motorcycles. But Frank wasn't a collector who hoarded his knowledge, he shared it. In 2013, he released How to Pick Vintage Motorcycles, a comprehensive guide that took readers through everything from spotting authentic vintage bikes to preserving their condition. He even dedicated a section to vintage toy motorcycles, proving that for Frank, the joy of collecting wasn't just about big-ticket items. It was about craftsmanship, history, and attention to detail. His dedication to the collecting world extended far beyond personal interest. Frank made it a point to give back to the antiques community. He partnered with other industry experts to host antique fairs, exhibitions, and live events. He helped bring collectors and dealers together, fostering a sense of community among people who shared his love for history. He also co-authored American Picker's Guide to Picking, giving fans a behind-the-scenes look at the ins and outs of the trade and offering tips. Based on years of first-hand experience, what made Frank truly special, though, wasn't just his deep knowledge or his incredible eye for valuable finds. It was his passion for storytelling. Whether he was holding a rusty gas pump or a toy robot from the 1950s, Frank could make you care about it, could make you see the world it came from, the hands that once held it, the place it once occupied in someone's life. For him, picking wasn't about profit. It was about preserving stories, keeping memories alive, and honoring the past one item at a time. Despite everything, his health challenges, his rocky departure from American Pickers, and his strained relationship with Mike Wolf, Frank remained deeply connected to what he loved. And for a while it seemed like he might finally get to enjoy a quieter or peaceful chapter of life. But in July 2022, tragedy struck. Frank suffered a major stroke at his home in Davenport, Iowa. By the time emergency responders arrived, he was unresponsive. The situation was critical and he was rushed to the nearest hospital where doctors did everything they could to stabilize him. Fans who had followed his journey for over a decade were shocked. Social media exploded with concern, prayers, and well wishes as people waited anxiously for updates. After several weeks in the hospital, Frank was transferred to a rehabilitation facility. His condition was serious, and recovery would not be easy. He was partially incapacitated, facing both physical and cognitive challenges that would require long-term care. For someone who had once crisscrossed the country, picking through barns and garages with boundless energy, it was a heartbreaking turn. But even in the face of such a devastating health crisis, there was hope. Those closest to Frank rallied around him. A legal guardian was appointed to manage his affairs, and steps were taken to ensure he received the best possible care. Supporters raised money, sent letters, and held on to the possibility that Frank might someday make a meaningful recovery. Yet, as time passed, updates grew few and far between. The vibrant man who had once brought forgotten history into living rooms across America was now fighting a battle far from the public eye, one that would ultimately prove to be his final journey. Recovery after a stroke is more than a medical journey, it's a complete life shift. For Frank Fritz, a man who once traveled the country chasing antiques, shaking hands with strangers, and living life on his own terms, the aftermath was nothing short of devastating. Ow! The road ahead was not just long, it was humbling, exhausting, and, at times, heartbreaking. Suddenly, the fiercely independent picker, who once roamed the backroads of America, was unable to perform basic tasks without assistance. He couldn't even manage his own finances. A court stepped in, appointing a guardian to oversee his daily care and a bank to manage his estate. Everything he once took for granted, his freedom, his autonomy, his privacy was gone in an instant. And then there was the cost. Frank's round-the-clock medical care came with a shocking price tag. $29,000 per month. It was a sobering figure. That highlighted just how much his health had taken from him. Yet through all of it, Frank still fought slowly, quietly, and with the help of those who cared for him. And in the most unexpected way. The stroke sparked something even more powerful. Reconciliation. In May 2023, something happened that no one could have predicted. Frank asked to see Mike Wolf. After years of silence, hurt feelings, and unspoken resentment, the two former friends sat down face to face. A mutual friend later described the moment as deeply emotional. Both men cried. Mike, once thought to have moved on from Frank entirely, told him something that brought it all home. No one could ever replace you. For the first time in years, the tension melted away. It wasn't about ratings, contracts, or public statements. It was about the bond they had forged long before television, when they were just two guys chasing history in forgotten barns, dreaming of what might be. In that quiet room, the friendship that had once captivated millions finally found peace. But Frank's time was growing short. By September 2024, his health had sharply declined. Years of fighting illness, compounded by complications from his stroke and an underlying heart condition called aortic stenosis, left him weak and fading fast. Those closest to him, his mother, his caregivers, and a few trusted friends knew the end was near. When the final call came, Mike didn't hesitate. He rushed to Frank's side, joining family in the quiet, solemn room. The air was heavy not just with grief, but with the weight of everything they had been through. In that moment, the past didn't matter. There were no camera crews, no scripts, no audience, just two friends. One saying goodbye to the other. Mike later shared that he held Frank's hand as he took his last breath. He whispered to him, told him he loved him, forgave him, and that everything was okay. Then, just like that, Frank was gone. His final words stayed with them. The past is never really gone. It's always with us, hiding in the shadows. Coming from a man who had spent his life digging through history, uncovering the forgotten and the discarded, those words felt hauntingly poetic. His loved ones still wonder what he meant in those final moments, what memories were flickering through his mind as he slipped away. Frank's death certificate listed complications from the stroke, worsened by aortic stenosis, as the cause. His body, after years of fighting, had simply reached its limit. The picker who once seemed unstoppable was finally at rest. But even in death, Frank had one last surprise. After his passing, the task of sorting through his estate began. Else, who had known Frank well, expected a few vintage signs, maybe some antique tools. What they didn't expect was the treasure trove they found when they opened the doors to his private garage. Inside was a collection that stunned even his closest friends. Row after row of vintage motorcycles, Harleys, Indians, custom choppers, some fully restored to gleaming perfection, others still in pieces, projects he had never finished. It wasn't just a collection, it was a museum of his life's passion. These weren't just machines to Frank, they were memories of backroad trips, flea market finds, long nights in the garage, and the joy of discovery. Every bike had a story. Every bolt had been chosen with care. And while the idea of these beloved pieces being sold off might seem tragic, Frank had other plans. According to those managing his estate, an auction is already in the works, one that will see his entire motorcycle collection, vintage signs, and rare artifacts go under the hammer. But the proceeds won't be going into a private trust or a business venture in a final. extraordinary gesture, Frank requested that all the money be donated to charity. His last act wasn't about fame, profit, or legacy. It was about giving back, turning a lifetime of collecting into one final gift for those in need. And in doing so, Frank Fritz left behind more than just antiques and memories. He left behind a legacy of passion, friendship, and heart.